we're at.
All
Reach the peak.
Exactly.
Or you're gonna try something else.
So let's see. Okay. So the sign-in sheet is making its way around, and your clay for the project connected with this unit, where I'm asking you if you feel comfortable. I know not everyone is okay with making representational art. Either create a fictional person for whom you are making a votive. There's inspiration pictures later on this lecture. Or you can make a literal or abstract rendering of a disease you or a loved one is experiencing. Or if you are not comfortable making your own clay art, there is a link on the assignment brief, which is in today's unit, Unit 4, I think, that links to the Wellcome Collection's archive of existing ancient votives. You can adopt one and talk about it. So I think I've covered a lot of my bases, but if you need further accommodation to make this work for you, just let me know. I'm not here to make anyone worship Asclepius or violate their conscience. Yes. Yes, absolutely. But play, you have some. But yeah, no. And it does not have to be good, because being good is not part of the point of the ancient exercise either. So this is not graded on, like, are you a sculptor? This is more of a do it and think, because we can talk all day about the abstract concept of making an image of your illness and leaving it somewhere. But I think making an illness image and then thinking about, like, how does this feel for me is an academic approach that we call phenomenology. It's also got a little bit of emotionalism in there, but essentially it's about figuring out what a subjective experience is like for you, what it does for you, and then using that to look at activities that were done in other times and other places, and to think about, like, what does this mean for folks doing it based on my experience? I'm overcomplicating it, yes.
Do you have a rubric placed
Yes.
Blackboard? Okay.
Yeah, so it's, let me bring it up and find it. Oh, great. There are more over here. There's still a bit left. Okay, great. And there are more bags up here if you end up needing bags. Right, so let me find.
Would we be able to turn off the overhead?
Let us do that. They're obnoxious and fluorescent. So let's descend into our habitual darkness. Thank you. I always feel weird making people sit with the lights out, but the lights hurt.
I like it.
I like the dark too. It makes this feel very dramatic. And also it does not hurt my brain so much. Just my other caveat for today is I'm on the tail end of a particularly nasty migraine attack, so if I'm cranky, it's not you. And if I'm not making a ton of sense, I'm doing my darndest. Just have me repeat myself. It's not you, it's me. Okay. So the assignment brief you will find. So under assignments, Unit 3, Unit 4, so this thing that says votive practicum includes, click, 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 click. Here are the instructions, including options, alternatives, etc., and then a step-by-step what to do. The write-up is not too terribly involved. I'm just basically asking you to write a little bit about what your process was, what you were thinking, how it worked. Oh, and also include a picture of your finished item. And again, I'm not grading it on is it good, I'm grading it on does it exist. So proof of life, but if you want to be super impressive, absolutely go for it. Okay, any other questions about this?
Do you have like some example ideas? Because I'm kind of having trouble.
There will, hold on to it because there'll be examples in the lecture. Yes, so they're coming.
If we decide to go, can we still keep the play?
Yes, absolutely you can. So like, you know, if you're just gonna pick an existing item, you can still play with the clay. Playing with clay is fun and it's really soothing, and I'm not taking that away from y'all. So yeah, specifics, we will get to ancient examples and then, come on, we need, okay, so that one is showing, this one is up. Let me just make sure my recording is still on the right tab. It is. Fantastic. Okay. So some of you may have noticed that Yuja ate our last 2 classes and is refusing to post them. So I'm learning yet another goddamn streaming recording software, this time built for YouTubers. So thoughts and prayers, y'all. I'm doing my best here. Okay. So we did this last time, but let's orient ourselves again. Who's that? Well, okay. Asclepius. His name is spelled several different ways depending on whether you're Greek or Roman, and if you are Greek, how you turn the Greek alphabet into the English alphabet. So you'll see all of these spellings. They're all valid. It's still the guy. He's chill about that. Okay. Which one of these is for dead people and which one of these is for medicine? Yes.
One on the left is for dead people, and one on the right is for medicine.
Left, right? Other way around, I think.
I'm saying.
Oh.
One.
You are right. This one, 2 snakes. 2 snakes dead. 1 snake. Doctor. You're sorry. Left and right is hard. Okay. So, because I'm remembering her name today, does anyone else remember Asclepius' wife's name? That is fine. It's not on the test. It's a Pione. However, this is him and one of his 2 daughters. Oh, and she's on the slide. So, Hygieia is the goddess of what, y'all?
Hygiene.
Yeah, hygiene, preventative medicine. Wash your hands. Hygieia. Panaceia. Does anybody remember what her thing is? Yeah? All cure, yes. The cure for everything. And this is either Podalirius or Machion. Does anyone remember which of the 2 is the surgeon? Yeah.
Podalirius is internal medicine, while Machion is the surgeon.
Bingo. Nicely done. If you have difficulty remembering this, I don't know how much this will help, but Machairos is Greek for knife, which is why Machion, his name means knifey McKnifester. That may or may not be helpful. Podalirius, I'm not sure. It's close to the word for foot, but he is not a podiatrist as far as I'm aware. Okay. Let me put this in the bag before it dries out. While I'll show you the map of scenic Epidaurus. So this is one of the many shrines dedicated to Asclepius. And while some of them are a little bit earlier than the 4th century, so the late 400s, early 300s BCE, because we're counting backwards, because BCE, this style of praying to Asclepius really gets going as the 5th century draws to a close and the 4th century begins. Possibly not coincidentally, this is also in the wake of a particularly nasty pandemic that breaks out just as Athens is going to war with Sparta and the Peloponnesian Wars. We have not yet figured out what this disease is, no matter what excited headlines will tell you. There is currently a bit of a fight between ancient DNA experts over whether or not they have found the DNA of the pathogen in the plague graves. Because we have the plague graves. We have the dental pulp, but figuring out whether a microbe in a body killed the body is trickier than you might think, and diseases change in their features and their symptoms over time. So maybe it's typhus. There's also a vocal but small minority that thinks maybe a form of Ebola, which is my favorite because it's kind of bonkers, but it also sort of fits. But at any rate, we're still workshopping what, if anything, was the pathogen causing this pandemic. But it was a really alarming one, both because the mortality rate was quite high, but also the symptoms were very traumatizing. Like, it impaired your peripheral circulatory system. So if you lived, you might lose fingers, toes, other dangling organs. You can fill in the bits there. It could also cause blindness, lifetime disability load. It was a really devastating disease. But it also took out some prominent politicians immediately involved in the war between Athens and Sparta. This is how the politician Pericles dies. If you're familiar with the Peloponnesian War, he's a big deal until plague. So this destabilizing force caused the rise of popularity of Asclepius and seems to heavily inform the way ancient people thought about Asclepius's vibe, which you can see in the reading is a little bit playful but benign, authoritative, knowledgeable, but understanding, chill. He doesn't mind how many times you come back to his clinic, which is something we like in a doctor. Epidaurus is a purpose-built shrine to Asclepius that we're focusing on because it is the highest budget and longest running of these shrines, but every major city had at least one, if not several. There's one in Rome, Pergamon, Athens, Corinth. Like, if there's a big city, there is a shrine to Asclepius. However, this one seems to be the model for what's going on in the smaller satellite shrines. So it's another good reason to look at it. Also, nobody else lived here except for people operating the shrine. And this means that we have a better sample archaeologically for figuring out how people are interacting with the god, because we don't have a lot of noise from people going about their regular lives. So here is what we have. Brief overview of the site map, and we'll visit various buildings along our way. This wall here and here is the border between the sacred ground and the nearby ground. So once you cross that wall, you are inside the sanctuary proper. Outside of it, regular normal rules apply. So what I mean by this is, inside Temenos wall is what we call this. So the Temenos wall, for regular worship of all gods in the ancient world, this is where you bring your sacrifice. This is where you would offer up part of it to be burnt for the god, part of it you would eat yourself. This is where the prayers would happen. This is where you would gather and pray as a community. You didn't do that inside the temple. Inside the temple is the god's house. You'd open the doors and the god would watch and partake and hang, but you'd stay out in the Temenos. When you're in the Temenos, you are under the protection of the gods. So no stealing from each other or the god. Definitely don't steal from the god in their own house. They really don't like that. You don't raise your hands violently to anybody, so no murder, no fist fights, no other crimes against persons. Also, there were rules about pollution for most gods, and here's where Asclepius is a little different. So for most gods, if you have to give birth, you leave. If you're on your period, you may not be able to go in. If you have some sort of limb impairment, again, in the Greek world, not so much as the Roman world, but there are some gods who demand that their priests be physically perfect. Again, not all Greek gods. Asclepius doesn't roll this way, except you still can't give birth on the sacred ground. You have to waddle out, then give birth. And you'll notice this is a plot point in some of the patients' stories, is that they'll pray to give birth and then they'll just make it out. And then, so he does, however, allow you, if you have a weeping sore, say, or a bleeding wound, you can not only come into the Temenos, but you can spend overnight inside one of the sanctuaries. So we're going to be looking at this building later. But right through here is a dormitory There might have also been people spending overnight here. There are multiple temples inside this Temenos wall, which is also a little odd, and we're not sure entirely what each of these buildings is doing. In smaller urban shrines of Asclepius, where there's only one temple building, that's where you would sleep overnight to pray to the god, and that is really unusual. Going in the temple, let alone sleeping in the temple, is something that you only do for other gods when you're seeking sanctuary because there's a mob trying to kill you, for instance. Which is what Pausanias ends up doing. He's a general during the war between Greece and the Persian Empire, and he's accused of collaborating with the Persians. He seeks sanctuary inside the temple of Athena Chalkioikos, so Athena of the Bronze House, and then they can't touch him, they can't kill him, because he's on a temple and you can't murder people in a temple, but you don't have to feed people in a temple either. So he starved to death, and allegedly he's still there to this day. If you go there at night, you can hear him still asking for bread in ancient Greek. Theoretically, I was not there at night. I can neither confirm nor deny. But if you're ever there, bring a sandwich for Pausanias. Poor Pausanias, buddy. He just wanted some good food. Sparta was not known for its good food. Like, it was infamous for having bad food on purpose. The Persian Empire had amazing food. Anyway, this area where you would sleep, which is the major thing that you are going on a pilgrimage to do in these shrine sites, is called the abaton or the aditon. They both mean the same thing in Greek. A means no, don't. Like, atypical is not typical, or asexual is not having sexual attraction. So, baton, bino, is don't walk there, don't step in there. Duton, duo means to put on clothes or to go inside a house. Means don't. So it's the don't go there, don't walk there, don't. Except you actually do, because Asclepius is different. So you go into the don't go there place, and you are set up on a couch overnight, which is what's going on here in the back. Our artist in this relief sculpture is showing what's happening to the patient in the real world back here. And then while you are sleeping overnight, you have a dream where you encounter the god. Sometimes you run into his assistant. So if he's not in town, he's at his other shrines, one of his sons might show up and treat you instead. There's one where the sons show up and they like cut a guy's head off and then they can't get it back on and they have to call dad to come fix it. But at any rate, they, much like private practice with a family of doctors, you might get the med student, and if the med student screws up, dad will come and you'll be okay. So it's a teaching hospital, which just delights me. At any rate, in the abaton, you've got the patient sleeping overnight. They might have been drugged. There's some art surviving from Epidaurus that seems to depict poppy flowers, like opium poppies, which opium is still something that we use to derive medication that removes pain and makes you drowsy and floaty, opiates. So, possibly he is high, which would explain why he is so chill with the sacred pet of the god nomming on his shoulder, which is what's up with the snake. That is a snake. There were pet snakes who would hang out in the shrine, sometimes pet dogs, both. But the pet snakes are more of a thing in the art because snakes are associated with the underworld, which is where this particular god lives. And snakes are messengers between the world below and the world above. So the snakes will snuggle with you while you are sleeping, and maybe that's why you need the drugs. Although, again, snakes are lovely, and I'm working really hard on, getting to a place where I can squeeze at them more, because they are wonderful and much maligned, and some of them are incredibly cute, especially with these little hats. I love a snake with a hat. And I've been told ball pythons are like snake puppies, so I support the snakes. In ancient Greece, supporting the snakes was less of an ask than it is for us, in part because venomous snakes in the Mediterranean exist, but it's not Australia or South America. The level of venomousness per snake, about as bad as it gets, is North African vipers, maybe asps, although asps aren't quite as venomous, and viper bites aren't as bad as you think. But also they have this relationship with the underworld that's a little bit more open and a little bit less scary, so perhaps some of the attraction to the danger noodles is the danger part. So, while he is sleeping, possibly drugged, we hope for his sake, one of the temple snakes is, if you've ever seen a pet snake, sometimes they just, on whatever, I've seen snakes do this. It's quite sweet. I hope that the teeth aren't out. And over his shoulder, there's a priest. The hand-raised posture is a prayer posture. So we're monitoring the snake situation while we're praying that the god will show up in the dream, which is what's happening over here. So in the dream scene, instead of a snake nibbling his shoulder, the god is coming up to his shoulder and applying a surgical treatment. A lot of the contents of the dreams have a surgical procedure the god does to you in your dream, and then you wake up and whatever it was is fixed. We wonder, and we do not yet have an answer definitely one way or the other, but we do wonder whether the priests of Asclepius were also applying some medical treatments themselves. Part of why we are unsure is that because they're crediting the god with good outcomes and interventions, they have a vested interest in not talking about them doing the cures, but being like, no, it's the god. Which is really confusing because we only have what they wrote down and their archaeology, and this leaves us having follow-up questions. So that's one of the big follow-ups, is what's actually going on in the Abaton when you're sleeping there. So at Epidaurus, the Abaton is this big standalone building. It's still inside the temenos, part of the wall in the sacred ground. And it's a stoa kind of building. So this building shape was used for shopping centers or sometimes hotels. So mostly shopping centers and, well, this building. It's a very odd building. There's an open porch in the front. And then there are inside doors with little cubicle kind of building room things. So it's a hallway with bedrooms where priests could come and go. And there's also a step on either side, up and down, maybe to keep the snakes in. I don't know. This railing between the columns on the front is also a little bit puzzling. Maybe that's also keeping the sacred animals from wandering. Unclear. And then this is right near the foundation of another temple building here that might have also been used for overflow. This is enough for 15 to 20 patients. We're not sure what their volume looked like at peak season. So when you come, you might have to stay for a while waiting your turn. In the Roman period, so here we're jumping ahead about 500 years or so, we have the account of a wealthy guy who probably had some kind of IBS going on, who spent like the better part of a year and some change living in a shrine of Asclepius and just repeatedly going into the Abaton for dream nights. So multiple day occupancy might be doable. Within the Temenos grounds is also an interesting temple. This is unusual for a few reasons. First, the shape. So round temple forms definitely happen in the ancient world. In the Greek world, we see them more in the Peloponnese, the southern part of Greece, than the northern part of Greece. They're also associated with shrines that are dedicated to either goddesses who have some role in the protection of the hearth. Hearths are round because fire pits are round, so round temple makes sense there. But also, graves in the Bronze Age were shaped like beehives, round with a kind of pointy top on them. And then later, when subsequent generations started venerating heroes of the Trojan War and creating this category of chthonic deity of the hero god, for instance, there were shrines to Achilles and Patroclus, or Achilles and Patroclus at the same time. There's one near Sparta to Helen, like Helen of Troy, Helen, where you would go to spend the night if your baby was ugly and you wanted your baby to be cute. You would take your baby to the shrine of Helen, and it was another one of these overnight situations. We're not sure if it's in the Temenos or in the temple, but you wake up and apparently the baby is cute. I can neither confirm nor deny, but I did visit, and I look exactly the same, so, you know, N1, take that for what it's worth. So it is not necessarily unusual that we have a round temple with Asclepius, who is in this hero god category, where he lived as a mortal, gets promoted to godhood, lives in the underworld. That makes sense. But this one is unusually elaborate. It's a really pretty building with some unusual design features because it was made by a famous architect named Polyclitus the Younger, who was a bit of a maverick architectural genius kind of guy who did a lot of fancy designs with engineered acoustics and other special features. He also did the theater that we're going to look at later that's also at Epidaurus. So maybe, actually, my civil engineer husband is now yelling in my head. He'd say, no, it's an engineer, that's not an architect. I'm not taking sides, but I am told that engineers find architects really exhausting, and I'm not going to involve myself in that fight today. But at any rate, Polyclitus the Younger is the designer. We know that from outside sources, and it also costs a lot of money because he's a celebrity engineer. So this is a high-budget building by a creative sort of dude, and there's some interesting stuff going on the inside that archaeologists have some theories about. Theories that I'm not sure where they've gone in the modern age, but we're going to talk about them because they're cool, and it lets me talk about the history of astronomy, which I like talking about. So, we have preserved a lot of the floor tiles from the original floor in this temple. We call this the Tholos Temple. 360 BCE is when this was constructed. I am going to, I think, talk about the floor and then go back for these other philosophers that I've put at the top of the slide. So, there's something weird going on with the floor. Not so much because it's got this diamond pattern, because diamond patterns on floors are pretty common across the ancient Mediterranean, and it's patterns of dark and light marble. However, as you go from the center, so you've got this large round bit of the floor that's right under an opening in the ceiling. So the way that this kind of temple style is lit is you have a round opening at the top of the roof called the oculus, or the eyeball, and this forms a ring that structurally supports a domed ceiling sometimes, but it also means that light is coming down in the shaft and then it moves across the floor in a pattern that varies depending on time and season, because as the earth rotates around the sun and we tilt, the sun hits different parts of the floor at different times. So connecting floor styles to what's going on with the calendar is not as much of a stretch as it seems. But what is odd is you get 1, 2 steps out from the middle, and then you have this triangular row here, where the diamonds start propagating again, but with this gap interruption thing. The theory is that what might be going on with this is that it's meant to be a model of the universe. However, something you may notice, actually, I'll label things and then I'll ask you what's weird about seeing this in 360 BCE. So this is the sun, and then this is the orbit of Mercury. This is the orbit of Venus. This is the orbit of Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. You can't see Uranus with the naked eyeball. I know that's a sentence. I'm just going to acknowledge that I said that. Okay. So back to this floor then. These are all of the planets that were known in the ancient world. What sounds odd to y'all who are familiar with the history of astronomy? Yes?
Heliocentric.
It is heliocentric. Something that you probably have heard of is that the geocentric, or Earth at the center of our cosmic model of the universe, was the dominant one in the ancient pre-modern world, and in fact didn't get challenged until the early modern period with Copernicus, Galileo, and subsequent furor about, oh God, is the sun at the center of the universe? How dare? Which I'm not going to weigh into, but the heliocentric model was not the only model kicking around in the ancient world. There were multiple ways of looking at the nature of the cosmos, in the same way that there were multiple theories about how human bodies worked and what made them up. So far, we've spent more time with humoral models, but we're going to talk later about atom-based models. Back to our universe here, then. Heliocentric models of the universe were articulated as early as the philosopher Pythagoras, who lived from about 570 to 495 BCE. Pythagoras was a nifty dude. I'm trying to do the short version of Pythagoras, which is hard because I kind of love him. Pythagoras and his school, Pythagorean philosophy, was based around the idea that if you understand the harmonics and mathematics of the universe, and you express it in both mathematical and musical terms, he did this blended expressing math as music and expressing music as math thing that I'm too bad at math to paraphrase, but it's very nifty. And his school also was really into making accurate astronomical observations and trying to account for a regular, mathematically satisfying way of describing the universe. And that seems to have brought them to a place where they felt that the sun was in the center of the cosmos, not the Earth, which we now know to be correct, although again, everything is relative, and geocentric models are kind of accurate in describing what the universe looks like from the point of view of Earth. I'm not going to go out and defend geocentricity, but taking a moment to understand geocentricity can be really mind-altering because it helps you think through observational bias and a lot of interesting issues in trying to figure out how the world works when you can't leave the planet. And how we've managed to do that is really nifty. And it begins with these early philosophers who aren't separating their ideas about the nature of the soul from the nature of the universe. They're thinking about all of this as part of their philosophy. Pythagoreans also, interestingly, included women philosophers. Pythagoras' wife Theano and also his daughter Theano Jr. were heavily involved in the writing down and spreading of Pythagorean philosophy, and they were a pretty gender-inclusive philosophical school. They also believed that you shouldn't eat meat, so they were vegetarians, but also they did not eat beans, because there are a lot of reasons why the beans. They seem to think that beans are maybe kind of like plant testicles, and therefore there was ick, but then also they were like, well, beans give you gas, and that doesn't seem right. There is a possibility, and this scholars have argued, because when Pythagoras dies, he dies violently. It's really sad. He's being chased by an angry mob who apparently did not want to learn the Pythagorean theorem. And they chase him up to a bean field in flower, so the pollen is in the air, and he's like, no, beat me up now, I'm not going in there. Which is kind of a little bit of an odd hill to die on, quite literally. Unless you have a rare but more common in the Mediterranean health issue called fauvism. So this is a kind of allergy to fava beans that at its most severe can be triggered by just breathing in pollen from broad beans. And it causes hemolysis. So it creates a cascade because your body doesn't have an enzyme that can process enzymes in the bean, and it kills you horribly. And the way that you don't have that kind of reaction is you don't eat the beans, you stay away from the beans. A little bit like peanut allergies for us today. So I want to say this as someone who also has food sensitivities. I get the logic of choosing Angry Mob over allergen. I don't like that choice. It kind of haunts me at night sometimes. But back to Pythagoras then. One of the things that he and his followers later believed in was a heliocentric model of the universe. And that first statement was later refined on by thinkers who kept working on the details because with the observational mechanics that you get from being on Earth, heliocentric models don't describe things like eclipses or regular alignments of the planets as well as geocentric models, because you have to know that orbits are elliptical, and you have to know how elliptical and how they're tilted relative to each other. So these details made early heliocentric models less accurate as a predictive tool than geocentric models, which meant that mathematicians who were really true believers in heliocentrism spent a lot of time and effort trying to get the details right. After the building of the Tholos, so this building was built in 360 BCE, our best description of this alternative heliocentric ancient model is in Aristarchus, writing around 320 BCE. So although Aristarchus wrote after this building was built, the ideas were already being kicked around and developed as Polyclitus the Younger goes to design this building. And Polyclitus the Younger is a mathematician, as well as an applied mathematician / engineer / architect. Sorry, Mr. Strauss. So if anybody would have put a heliocentric model on the floor, it would be Polyclitus the Younger. That's just the kind of nerdy nonsense that he'd get up to, and as a fellow nerd myself, I stand that. So you get a contract for a temple for a nerd god doing nerd prayers, which medicine is. That's a science positive ritual and religious space. And you try to put together a building that will express your admiration for the marriage of natural sciences and the divine. Putting your favorite model of the cosmos on the floor where the sun shines down through the roof is a really great choice. So should you ever be in such a position, let me know, send me pictures. Also, the James Webb Telescope just was able to see inside the atmosphere of Uranus last week, and it was really exciting, and I'm very excited about it. It has nothing to do with this, but thank you for supporting me in that. Yeah. My science credits in college were all in astronomy, and they've been very useful. Look, I like astronomy. Space is cool. So, all of this assumes that we've put the floor together right, and that we have indeed interpreted what's going on with the diamond shapes correctly. This might just be a cool floor where he was like, wouldn't it be pretty if we put a line halfway through and interrupted the squares? So, what I might have just described to you, maybe a house of cards and a hallucination based on some elaborate modern fan fiction. Nonetheless, that's one of the ideas we have about this tomb, and that is nifty. Or not, tomb / temple. This is what it looks like today, which I know is a little bit of a wah-wah after looking at the reconstruction. The floor we have not left in place because the shrines were broken up at the end of polytheism's official period as state religion. The switch over to Christianity combined with increasing neglect of the site, and also 2,000 years is hard on a building, okay? We don't judge. But the floor tiles were found in between the supports for the sub-basement, which is also why this looks like such an attractive, oh, of course that looks like that. But we had to put the floor tiles back together from a pile. So a caution, but it's cool. Anyway, the sub-basement though has some really interesting stuff going on with it. This rock is really rough hewn because it doesn't show, so it doesn't have to be neatly dressed. However, these concentric circles with space between them are not the normal way that circular temple buildings are supported underneath the floor. And if you look a little bit closer, there's an entryway here. It's broken down a bit, but you come in through the basement here, and then there's an arched doorway here. And then on the inner circle, there's another arched doorway, I think it's like here. And then there's another one at the very center. So it is a maze. There is a circular maze situation going on underneath the temple floor, which has led us to question, why is there a basement maze underneath this Tholos temple? That's weird. I don't know of any other basement maze in a temple, although you can crawl underneath the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, but it's more like an underfloor access. It's really fun. I scraped my knees very badly, but it was really fun. Back to this one. So we have a few theories about what is up with this, all of them speculative and a little bit fevered, but here we go. So theory number one, this is where we keep the sacred snakes, and this is the sacred snake hutch. Fine, Indiana Jones is going to love this, but he's a very bad archaeologist, so he deserves it. Very bad. Never lays a grid. Right. So, snake habitat. Item number, but like, if it's snake habitat, why would you build a maze? The snakes don't need a maze. And then it's a maze full of snakes. What are you doing? What is that? So, probably not that. Okay, idea number two. You'd have people who were perhaps large donors or particularly high-profile patients, because sometimes a local king would be like, this is my best friend, I want you to take extra special care of them, and Asclepius's shrine runs on donation money, so I guess they'll get the fancy area. So this might be the VIP section, where if you want an extra special dream, while you're in the temple at night, possibly high, maybe with snakes, you'd hear from underneath the floor, which is where you'd expect to hear voices coming from, because you're worshiping, where does the god that we're worshiping live when we're here? In the underworld. So you'd hear, hello, please wait your turn, triage begins in 5 minutes, you know, whatever it is that, can I have your insurance card? They don't, because there is no insurance card in antiquity. So then priests can kind of move around below the floor and do a soundscape where they're like, step, 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 step. I'm getting the ultrasound machine, or whatever it is. Not the ultrasound machine. There are no ultrasound machines. Although one of my, I don't know if favorite is the word, but one of the more amusing don't let this happen to you fails of ChatGPT essays once, so the answer was that the Roman surgeon should order a CT scan, and then I was like, buddy, no. Read it before you copy and paste. I'm like, don't at all, but
Did he get in massive trouble?
He did. He got in so much trouble, and he was so embarrassed. Like, I'm not even mad anymore, because it's like he made a very bad choice, and he got exactly what he deserved, and it was hard for him, and he came back and did it the right time next time. So, you know, the victims did not suffer long, except now everybody knows this story. Don't let that be you. Anyway, back to our foundation. So that, I think, is the most probable scenarios. Another one, which is much less exciting, is that this is just an access point for repairs and floor maintenance and stuff. Although being able to get underneath the floor to repair things is less of an issue when there is no plumbing in the building, which there is no plumbing in the building. Although a theory that I don't think anyone currently stands by is maybe it's a cistern, like water storage, but this isn't watertight. Why? So, most likely this is space that aids in ritual special effects. So, it's backstage, or understage, as it were. There's a lot of other buildings on this site outside of the Temenos walls, and we think these are infrastructure support kind of places. They include kinds of buildings that we know by type. So, for instance, there are places that are built like gymnasia in other Greek cities. This is a really common building type, so when we see it, we know what we're looking for. For ancient Greek cities, the gymnasium, or gymnasion, which means the nakedarium, or the place of the naked people, because gymnos means naked, like a gymnosperm is a naked seed kind of plant, in case you wanted to know. So, gymnasium means the naked people place, because there were no athletic shorts except for women in women's gyms. But for men, you would exercise naked. You'd rub yourself up with oil and then dust yourself in dirt, and then you'd wrestle with your buddies, and then you'd scrape all of the gunk off at the end and get yourself a massage, and then go about your day. But this is where people would train for health maintenance. It's where doctors would hang out and give you exercise and preventive medicine advice. So finding it in a healthcare shrine is not unusual, and that supports the idea that there was some conventional medical care going on in this place as well. So there are also buildings that look like hotel spaces where you have individual rooms with doors that aren't leading into each other, so hotel space probably, with courtyards and that sort of thing. This makes sense because people were coming from all over the Mediterranean and eventually all over the Roman Empire once this becomes an imperial Roman protectorate. And they need a place to stay. So having on-site hotels makes sense. We'd expect to see that. But then also, baths, toilets, because one of the basics of health in the ancient world is do not eat where you poop, which is really good advice. Don't do that. But then there are also some interesting features that are common to other shrines, but are a little interesting to find here. For instance, this foot race stadium. So a stadium is a common sports infrastructure feature of religious shrines, because religious shrines would host games in honor of the god as a bit of a tourist draw, part of their worship and sacrifice culture. One of the ones that you've most likely heard of, because we're in the middle of its modern cousin today, is the stadium and facilities at Olympia and the Olympic Games, which is one of the many. But there are also games at Nemea and, it seems, Epidaurus as well. So this is more a feature that we'd expect to see at anybody's shrine. There's one at Delphi too. Interestingly, each stadium was slightly different in length, and it was used as a measurement system in the ancient world in the way that we use football fields in America. You know, like you're watching a random documentary and they'll measure the dinosaur football fields. This would be relatable to an ancient Greek person because they'd measure things in stadia, but each one was slightly different in length. So if they wanted to be precise, they'd be, it's like 95 Olympic stadia. So they'd use the stadium at Olympia as their measuring stick. But sometimes they're not that specific because a stadium is about the same length. There's kind of when you measure with your heart, a stadium is this much unit of measurement. And enough people ran foot races in the ancient world that you relate in the same way that if you've ever been forced to take gym class, you know how long a football field is. So this one is a medium-sized stadium, but it's not a lot of seating. Some of it's still under the turf, but it's can fit at least 1,000, maybe more. It's quite a lot. And you don't build that unless you have a really good reason to go to that much trouble and that much marble. This is one of the better preserved stadia as well, which is kind of nifty. So either this is working like stadia at other shrines where people are just going to race. Or because this is a healing shrine, and it's a healing shrine where many of the patients are coming for mobility related reasons, there may be a kind of adaptive or rehabilitation kind of program going on here. So we may be looking perhaps at one of the earliest ancestors of Special Olympics, but that one we can't prove really well. But it's a possibility worth keeping out there. So this might have been a space where you go to do rehab or adaptive exercise. And it's a normal facility that you'd expect to find. That isn't, by the way, speculative as I just made it sound. One of the persistent issues in Greek culture was this conflation of having a perfect, beautiful body with having a perfect, beautiful soul, which meant that if you had limb differences or an impairment, you would face a certain amount of ostracism, judgment, depending on what the issue was and how your community interpreted it. There could be stigma for that. So a place where you could go to work out where you aren't going to be looked at funny for having a body that doesn't look like most people's bodies is a thing that you'd need in the ancient Greek world. And so having a space like a healing shrine where you are there specifically because you are ill, something is not working great, you need a god to intervene, you've created a space that's already, at least in theory, more welcoming to people who need accommodations to work out and just need to have a space where they don't feel weird doing it. And I hope that was the case for them because I love that for folks. Similarly to the stadium space, there is also a theater, and one of the best preserved and best engineered theaters in the ancient world, full stop period. This thing is impressive as heck. And if you're ever taking a history of theater course, this is likely the theater that you see. This is another Polyclitus the Younger build. So he did both the Pholos and this theater. It's cut into the side of a mountain with really well-preserved stadium seating. The backstage is less well-preserved, but the seating bit of it, because it's stabilized on bedrock, it's retained its acoustics, and the acoustics are really amazing. So if you're ever there, and send somebody down to the bottom of the stadium where it's right now a gravel floor, it used to be paved, and then you go up and hang out up here at any point around this essentially giant megaphone-shaped theater space. If somebody picks up a pebble and drops it, you can hear the scrape of the rock going back up and down. It is eerily good acoustics. This is a picture I took from the night I was there for a production of Aeschylus's Persians, done by a collaborative Turkish and Greek theater company who came together and did the production. And this poor lady has been in my slides for 20 years. I hope she doesn't mind. But she looks fabulous. But yeah, so there's the stage space set up, and you can see pretty darn well, even if you're up in the back seats, which I was. I was about like halfway up to where it was starting to get slightly unsafe. And the sun, as it sets, was setting kind of over here. So there was this beautiful mellow light filtering through the hills. This was in early August. And the smell coming up off of the pine forests in the distance with it's kind of up on a mountainy area, but it's near enough to the sea that you still get a little bit of sea air too. It's a really incredible space atmospherically, and the acoustics with the pretty decent unobstructed view made for a great theater experience. So why is there a very, very high budget theater space at the shrine, other than the shrine was making a lot of money, which I think is reason number one. The shrine made a lot of money. A lot of people came here for many centuries. But also, this is a system of medicine that does not put a divider line between mental health and physical health. They believe that your mind and body are connected, that the mind is part of the physical body, to the point where when we get to Galen, he's going to try to weigh the soul by like weighing bodies before and after they die and figuring out what the difference is, which is one of the more interesting scientific experiments in the history of science. But then back to our theatrical space. This is a shrine that's about giving you good results mentally as well as physically, and we're in a situation where getting that spiritual good result for many people could be the more transformative outcome. So even if the god doesn't miraculously heal whatever is going on with your body, having that issue heard out, validated, having people include you, pray over you, having a space where you go see a cool play and forget that whatever is going on for a while. That, I think, is part of what is a draw for this space, and part of why, even if not everybody gets a miracle cure, which getting a miracle cure statistically is difficult for most people, there are many ways to feel better, and I think that this is a big part of what's happening here. So, another part of the activity at these ritual spaces, and finally we're getting to the play, is leaving offerings. And this is something you would do both at big shrines like Epidaurus and little regional shrines, sometimes like corner shrines you couldn't even walk into in your city. We find a lot of medical instruments because doctors would come here to either give thanks for a procedure that went well, or at the beginning of your career, you'd say like, hey, I'm starting my practice, Asclepius, I need your help. So this is a space for providers as well as for patients coming in and wanting to get their head on right so that they can give good care, which is an important part of healthcare support and infrastructure, is to treat your compassion fatigue. Other things that we find a lot of, rings. These are bronze rings, and we're not sure what all of them are for, but underneath, in this case, there are many, 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 many lamps. And this is just a small subset. So many lamps, because this is a shrine dedicated to a god of the underworld that has most of its ritual activity at night, because night is the time where we pray to the underworld, so you got to turn the lights on. And a lot of people lost their lamps. Okay, but this is the headliner, the thing we've been waiting for, the anatomical votive. If you didn't want to do an entire overnight, or if you're working your way up to an overnight, another way that you can make contact with Asclepius is to make for yourself, or have made for you, a model of the body part that's giving you issues. You take this and you offer it up to the god in the sanctuary, and we'll talk a little bit about where in the sanctuary, what's going on with that in a minute. So you leave it there, and then that is your calling card, your memo to the god, so that when he has a moment and can get around to you, he can deal with your body part and he'll know that that one's yours. So here's a range of anatomical votives. Some of these are exactly what they look like. We find a lot of breasts and genitals, likely because breastfeeding is difficult and a lot of things can go wrong with it. Mastitis is not a joke. So also, if you are a professional breastfeeder, which is something people would do in the ancient world, the wet nurse was a necessary part of the childcare ecosystem, even though baby bottles did exist, but not everybody makes enough milk for their baby, and some people make lots of extra, and that's a feature of our species, not a bug. And having your career rest on how well you can lactate means that if something's going wrong with that, you may need intervention from Asclepius. So we find a lot of breasts. And then both young people and older people's genitals, for a lot of things can happen that go a little sideways on you with your genital tract if there are no antibiotics. If you've ever had a UTI, you know. So it makes a lot of sense that we would see these body parts. Another thing that can happen if you're uncircumcised and you're in a culture where you're not wearing clothes that are closed at the bottom, so tunics with or without underpants. As you're walking along the dusty roads and dust is floofing up into your bits, it can get lodged in folds of skin, and then you can end up with irritation